All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another virtual Nerd Night in conjunction with our good pals at Littlefield. I hope you're having a lovely evening thus far. As you can see by the lovely descriptor at the bottom of my name is Matt Wasowski. I am the big boss of Nerd Night, and it's nice to have all of you here. So, a couple of things I want to tell you about before we get started here, so we can all kind of follow along at home. So, first of all, obviously, one of the advantages of doing Nerd Night New York virtually is that you are all in different locations. So, for all of you watching either here in Zoom, watching on Facebook, watching on YouTube, go ahead in the chat areas and just let everyone know where you are logged in from. I am coming to you live from my bedroom in Brooklyn, New York. And the reason that I think the important part is the bedroom is more important to note than the city itself, is because if you look at the tagline there, for those of you who are unfamiliar and uninitiated in Nerd Night, we've had the first tagline there forever, be there and be square. But what we do need to know is that we've had an alternate tagline for 17 years since we began, which is Nerd Night. It's like the Discovery Channel with beer. And that means that we encourage you as an audience member to drink along as much as possible. So let me reach over, and here's why I mention my bedroom. So normally I'm a beer drinker, but in honor of one of our presentations tonight, I'm going to drink wine. And I should probably turn off my virtual background to show you this. Maybe I'll do this later on when we get to Rachel's presentation. But I'm drinking red wine on a 2-week-old white bedspread, and so yeah, I'm a dangerous man. I'm playing with fire. I did do the responsible thing and actually lay a towel under me right now, so I'm trying to create a little red wine white bedspread barrier. We'll see how that goes. So I just want to virtual cheers all of you. I hope you're all drinking something delicious. Have a beer, have a cocktail, have some wine, have some moonshine, have a non-alcoholic drink if you don't drink, but it's a good way to enjoy it. Sometimes we tell people where we came from, but all you really need to know is that Nerd Night came from drinking, rock and roll, birds in Africa that are sometimes nice and sometimes assholes. And yeah, that's how you got here now. So for tonight, there are a couple of things I want to let you know. So first, no matter where you are in the world, there's probably a Nerd Night somewhere near you. This is a terrible map, but I think it gets the point across is that there's lots of places where Nerd Night might be. So if you're in Amherst, Massachusetts, or Bratislava in Slovakia, or Reykjavik, or Vancouver, or North Vancouver, or most recently Colorado Springs, there's probably a Nerd Night near you. And when I introduce our presenters in a moment, they are from the Baltimore, DC Beltway area, which may or may not have a few eyeballs on it in a couple of days. Luckily, one thing for today is that we wanted to have nothing either Halloween or political focused for you, so you are welcome. This is a Halloween and political free space for the next hour or so. Most importantly, you see all the locations that I showed you, but I do want to thank Littlefield, Gabe and Caitlin and the folks there. They are our homes here, that is our home in New York. Hey, homes. And they've been just great friends of Nerd Night for years, and they are the ones pushing the buttons behind the scenes here. So as always, thank you to Littlefield, and I will do this as an appeal to all of you. Obviously, over the last 7 months, many smaller venues, and frankly, venues of all shapes and sizes have obviously been hit enormously hard, arguably harder than any other sort of group or industry in the world because of what's happening with the pandemic. So if you can ever find it in your hearts to donate, if you have any money and you're in a position to do that, venues like theirs would certainly appreciate the help as they struggle to kind of get through and hopefully get more bodies into their buildings sooner than later to do fun face-to-face performances. So if you're in the position to do that, that's terrific. If you're not, we totally understand. But that is my appeal to all of your good senses, to all of you good folks out there on the other side of the internet. Okay, so while you're all here tonight, as always, we've got 2 delightful 18 to 21 minute long presentations that will both inform and entertain and dazzle all of you. We're going to have Joel coming up in a couple of minutes first. He's co-boss of Nerd Nite Baltimore. He's going to talk about shadows in space. How do you get a shadow in a place that's extremely dark? You will find out in a few moments. And then again, as I'm drinking wine, which I very rarely do, but that's going to be in honor of our second presentation as we hear about the weird empires and all the sordid details that made the Gallos and the Franzias the leading names in cheap, affordable, delightful wine that we know today. But first, I've got 3 quick things that I want to talk to all of you about that are incredibly important. And that is going to be world records, most notably world records that were set just in the past few days. In fact, one of them was just set a couple of hours ago. For those who are not regulars in Nerd Nite New York, you should know that. So here in New York, our Nerd Nite season runs from September to May. We sort of follow a traditional academic calendar, and I take the summer off because A, I get tired, and B, in New York, everyone flees for the summer anyway, so it's hard to get a good crowd. And so what I've done for probably 12 or 13 years now, I've got a tradition of every September, starting each September Nerd Nite new season, talking about 6 or 7 world records that have been set in the previous 12 months. And so I figured today might as well stay sort of consistent with that. And, you know, since we're in October, sort of starting a virtual season here. But, you know, let's make this topical. Let's talk about things that happened just this week. So here we go. Number 1, for all of you gardeners out there, just thought you should know, there's a good cantaloupe image in your coming to you right now. The world's largest cantaloupe was just harvested a couple of days ago by this young man in Missouri. Shattered the record by 2 entire pounds. And I do like the image of the regular size cantaloupe that you see in your everyday grocery store versus the larger record one. It looks slightly more like a pumpkin to me, but the good people at Guinness can of course verify that it is indeed a cantaloupe. You know, cantaloupes to me generally don't have much taste, so maybe a bigger one is more flavorful and hopefully packs a punch that these smaller ones do not. Pro tip that I learned a few years ago, you probably all know this anyways, but I will say it because it's Nerd Nite in case you don't. The only thing I've ever found that makes a cantaloupe taste slightly more delicious, put salt on it, and it somehow really brings the flavor out. So if you've got some salt, got a cantaloupe, put them together. It's a delightful combination, and maybe that'll inspire you to grow a 72-pound cantaloupe and sometime be on a Nerd Nite World Record presentation. All right, world record number 2. This was also broke this week. And it's sort of a world record, sort of just a neat novel thing. These 2 gentlemen in, not Leipzig, I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm terrible. I already forgot the university. In southern Germany, they just recorded the shortest recordable amount of time. You know, obviously people are always trying to talk about how to measure time in a long way. They actually measured the shortest amount of time. It is a zeptosecond, as you see there. And they're able to measure 1/trillionth of 1/billionth of a second. I believe that is 10 to the negative 21st. So that's really short. If you can somehow figure out how to prove that you can document a shorter amount of time, you can get on this as well. You might need a big machine that looks like that, or maybe a bigger one. So go start tinkering in your basements right after this Nerd Nite. And then finally, this literally happened about 2.5, 3 hours ago in St. Cloud, Minnesota. This was the world record for consecutive Frisbee throws. The only parameters, basically, it's literally, so basically it should just be playing catch with a Frisbee. These 2 brothers in St. Cloud were, and the only parameters, they have to be a minimum of 5 feet apart and have to be able to, and no one could hold onto the Frisbee for more than 5 seconds. So just playing catch back and forth. I always like to end these presentations with, I think, what we call low-hanging fruit records. 1,000 consecutive catches seems enormously easy, I would think. So you can see that they more than doubled that record in their first attempt. And so, again, if any of you have a couple of hours later tonight or tomorrow or this weekend, if it's nice where you are, try to break this record. I will point out, some of you have heard me say this before, but so Gabe, who is one of the producers here at Littlefield, and myself back in September in New York, we unofficially broke a world record. It was the longest distance to throw a tortilla, particularly a 12-inch tortilla. Has to be thrown like a Frisbee. The record was 56 feet. I brought a bunch of tortillas to the venue back in September, because last September of 19, because that seemed very doable. 56 feet. It's not even the distance from home plate to the pitcher's mound. And literally within the first 5 attempts, we both broke 100 feet. So I think I've got a pretty good track record of picking achievable records that you can break. So all of you, try to break this record. It seems like it can be very easily done. Just play catch in a room with a Frisbee, don't drop it, and you should be good to go. All right, so that's enough of my yammering on. I'm going to stop my sharing here, and I'm going to ask the beloved Dr. Joel Green to enable his audio, enable his microphone, start some screen sharing. So he is a fine young man that all of you should get to know. He is one of the co-bosses of Nerd Nite Baltimore. He has been a friend of and boss of Nerd Nite for more than a decade. He's presented at Nerd Nite Austin, Nerd Nite New York, Nerd Nite other places that I'm forgetting. But you know, it's only my job to sort of know all of that. So with that, let's talk about to this world famous fancy astronomer about shadows in space and how something dark can also have dark things in it that we may or may not be able to see. So Joel, take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt. I wanted to say that I'm drinking a Glenmorangie 14-year cask. I'm sorry, it's not wine, but I wanted to be consistent.
That's fair. It's Santori time.
All right, I will share my screen. And there we go. I think that's good. All right. Welcome, everyone, to my presentation on shadows in space. But before I start, I'd like to say that, you know, Nerd Nite Baltimore operates normally out of the fantastic Belgian beer bar called Decline du Vel, a wonderful spot in Baltimore's Hamden neighborhood. Highly recommend it. You know, we have many thanks to them. We've had over 20 events there in 4 years, about one every 2 to 3 months, and are looking forward to doing that again in the future. And actually, our second speaker was even one of our speakers at one of those events. So looking forward to a new entertaining lesson from Rachel. Anyway, it's good to see you all virtually and talk to you. And I'm going to talk today about shadows in space. And you had to make that echo. It just doesn't work if you don't echo it. So again, Matt, you might have asked the question, what the heck is a shadow in the darkness of space? And I'm going to answer that question. But first, I'm going to tell you a story that may not seem initially that connected. So we live in the solar system. It's a collection of planets, dwarf planets, whatever you want to classify them as, comets, asteroids, dust particles, some of my favorite, and of course in the middle this giant sun. And everything is kind of orbiting in this plane around the star, more or less. Some of it's skewed out of the plane. But you know, this is our home in the solar system. But if you were to rewind the clock back 4.6 billion years, you might see a solar system that looked something like this, which is a big cloud of gas, mostly gas, with small dust particles hanging suspended in that gas. And one thing I haven't mentioned here is that this animation, this sort of cartoon of what the solar system would have looked like, is actually to scale much bigger than the solar system is currently. That is to say that we formed out of this big cloud, this molecular cloud, this cloud of hydrogen gas that collapsed to make the sun and all the planets around it. First the gas giants, and then probably the rocky planets afterward. So a lot of the things that are making up these planets sort of formed from growing mostly inside of this disk and sort of stealing the material that was in their orbit as they went around, and creating sort of clusters and clumps. And we know this partly because we've actually retrieved samples from things that either fall into Earth or that were sampled from directly on asteroids and comets, but also by using a technique called spectroscopy to study the light from stars that are still giving birth to their planets now, to see what kinds of gases and dust particles are in orbit around them. And these are all examples of things that have formed, that we have observed to be around, you know, in space. And so it's really exciting. A lot of these things are things they're all things you find on Earth. And if you want to sort of imagine what it would be like to see pebbles smashed together to build gradually, and imagine the scale, imagine taking things that are smaller than grains of sand, but enormous numbers of them, and letting them drift together, collect, smash together, mash together, and form into this aggregate pebble, and then series of pebbles that get mashed together, like this core sample of a chondritic meteorite that you see that I'm showing here. So this is how things grow from the tiniest smaller than sand grain size scales up to planets. And of course, one of the best ways to study the formation of dusty solar systems is using infrared light. That is light that is longer wavelength than our eyes can see, or redder than red. And this light is best measured by the upcoming James Webb Space Telescope, which my institute, the Space Telescope Science Institute, will be the Science and Mission Operations Center for here in Baltimore. So when you think Baltimore, you should think space telescopes, which I'm sure is everyone's first association with Baltimore now. So James Webb is, this was a picture of it a few years ago when it was in the lab testing in NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center down the road in Greenbelt, Maryland. And it's now off in California, being integrated together and being tested and actually being prepared for launch about a year from now, basically Halloween of next year. But the thing about James Webb is it's not yet in space. So I did get to see it as the mirrors were being put together in the clean room, but it's still not up there. And there's some experiments, this is before I had a beard, that I'd like to do right now. So this is one of my favorite stories. So this is actually this is another artist's rendition of what the formation of a solar system might look like, this swirling disk of gas. And again, as I said, this is a very large scale, but this is the cool thing. This was in 2009. In 2015, this is an actual picture taken at microwave frequencies of an actual disk orbiting a star, taken by the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, which is a huge array of telescopes in Chile. And this picture shows not only this disk that is actually mostly facing us, so that's why it looks kind of oval, it's sort of at an angle. And the little slices there are sections in which there is not dust. So these are cleared out sections, or at least there's less dust there. So something's happening, and it may or may not be related to the formation of planets. It may be a chemistry effect, but whatever it is, there's a lot of activity. These disks don't just sit there. They're in the process of making their planets, and this is an example of this happening. So we took the telescope that I work on now, the Hubble Space Telescope, and we looked at a very interesting disk to try to learn more about what happens in the middle. And if you look at this picture that Alma took, the habitable zone, the scale of this is enormous. This is several times bigger than say the distance from here to Pluto. So this is quite a bit bigger than our solar system. And the habitable zone, that's the area where the temperature in this disk is probably something like room temperature, is inside the innermost pixel of this image. So you can't, even though we have this wonderful resolution image, we can't see the middle. And it would be neat if we could magnify these things so that we could actually understand the innermost regions. And there's an interesting trick that Hubble can't do it on its own, but using a trick of light and shadow, that we were able to do some direct study of the innermost region. So, and this is how this happens. So this is an actual Hubble picture of a disk system, and I have to explain what you're seeing here. So you see these sort of bowl-shaped, upside and down shaped things. These are, they're called scattered light cones. This is light flying out of the central star, which is invisible but in the middle of the image, and it's sort of bouncing off these walls, and you're seeing this glow that forms illuminating the wall of the sort of cleared out material. And it's like a big jet. This green thing is this, out both directions, is this bipolar jet that's screaming out at high speeds and sending material firing out of the system, which is spinning very rapidly, kind of like a rapidly spinning dreidel. In the middle, invisibly, is a star. But what's really interesting is it's not just the star, but this horizontal slice that you see, which I've marked as the shadow. That is not that there's nothing there, but there's the light from the star is blocked from reaching there by the dust that's in the way. So it creates this dark lane. And we're going to use that trick, but in a much more extreme situation. So disks seen by Hubble are in shadow and are tiny. So back to what I was saying, shadows in space. So this is a picture taken by the Hubble telescope, and there's a couple of colors here, of a region of what's called the Serpent's molecular cloud. That's right, it's in the constellation, it's actually behind the constellation Serpent. And this is a big factory that's building new star and planetary systems all over the place. So most of the stars you're seeing in this picture, these things with the sort of crossed glow, which is actually an effect of Hubble's observations, and not real to the stars twinkling or anything like that. these stars are all embedded in this cloud. This is a dusty, gassy area that's making new systems. And you see this beautiful sort of frightening eye in the lower right. That's this sort of gorgeous star that's blowing out, sort of billowing out pieces of the cloud and creating this gap. And that's really neat. So there's actually like not much material around that star. It's sort of a hole. But there's another dark area, which I want to point you to, which is not a hole. And if you look up here on the upper right, you'll see something very interesting. So let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so there's some dark cones here centered on that star. Now, if we tilt it, so you can see that they're almost exactly symmetric going to the right and left. It's kind of amazing. And let's just blot out those two other stars that are kind of in the way and confusing the picture. And you can pretty clearly see this conical this sort of double cone shape. So I could draw some arrows here. It's something like this. This is roughly what it looks like. This sort of this broad boundary between cloud and darkness. Does that mean there's nothing there? Does that mean that it's the bat signal? It certainly looks like the bat signal. No, it is not the bat signal, but it is very interesting anyway. If you take a lamp with a shade, and you look at the way that the light is cast from that lamp, you have a bulb inside the lamp, and the shade is blocking the light essentially from getting out the sides, creating this double illuminated shape and this sort of this darkness cone in both directions. That's what's happening here. We have, in this analogy, the star in the middle is the bulb, and the disk, which is the dusty thing that's wrapped around it, is blocking the light from coming out just to the left and right. But above that disk, where it's not blocking the light comes out very clearly. And because the lampshade here is creating a very sharp boundary, you can really clearly see the shape. And it's telling you interesting things about the shape of the lampshade, or in this case, the structure of the disk, magnified enormously over the wall as it casts this shadow. So this region, by the way, is called the Serpent's Cloud, and the star that's casting the shadow is EC82. So you can guess that the disk is aligned so that it sort of matches an angle the two sides of the cone. And by the way, I just love this because this has nothing to do with anything, but on the upper left of the image is actually another shadow, just like a mini version of the other one. It's not like some weird, Einstein reflection or something. It's an actual other star disk shadow being cast that's slightly smaller in scale on the upper left, and we just call it Shadow Junior. We're going to ignore it now. Anyway, the interesting thing about shadows is that they can actually be thousands of times, well, they can be bigger than the thing that's casting them. And in this case, the shadow is thousands of times bigger than the thing that's casting it. In this picture, these tourists, right, you can see details about the two tourists and what they're doing based on their shadow that you can't see by just directly looking at them. So the effect is essentially magnifying the details in a certain way and distorting them. And in our case, the shadow is being cast from a small region of the inner part of the disk, where the light from the star intercepts the disk, and the parts of it that clear the disk come out and illuminate everything, and the parts that don't hit the disk create the shadow. So that lip is probably about 1 astronomical unit, or 100 million miles apart from the star to the disk. The shadow that it's casting is 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 times bigger. So that's incredible. It's 1,000 AU. It's 100 billion miles. It's enormous. And so the effect is truly magnified. And what this means is that if any change happens between the star and the disk, the shadow would change too. And like shadow puppetry, it would move. And what's really neat is, by total accident, we looked at this star twice, taking 2 pictures 1 year apart. So 1 year, some time, but not a lot of time for astronomical time. And during that year, we blinked these 2 images back and forth, and you can see immediately that it looks like our bat shadow is actually flapping, that the light is moving up and down, or rather the covering is moving up and down. The lampshade cover effectively is bouncing up and down, or you could think of it as the light bulb moving up and down. And that could be because in the center of the system, there's 2 stars that are actually orbiting each other and are illuminating from different angles at different times, or it could be that the lampshade itself has a warp or an imperfection that's sort of moving around. So those are kind of two possibilities. Basically, either the light source is moving or the blocking source is moving or changing. But either way, we did not expect this. And you can see that it can't be because that there's actually no material there. It has to be a shadow because it's just like it's like an inverse flashlight that's just moving back and forth. You wouldn't expect the whole cone to move like that back and forth. So I think this is awesome, and I love this thing. No, I'm still sure that it's not now like the bat signal, right? It is a shadow, which is kind of cool. There's a blocking source blocking his flashlight, but it's not cast the same way. It's the lamp. So as I was saying, it sort of could be a moving light source. So this is the idea where there are two stars that are very tilted relative to each other, and they're sort of orbiting each other, and then the light essentially moves in different ways as the stars pass in different locations relative to the disk itself. Now here's something really cool. Imagine you're in your yard, or in New York City, you're watching a fire hydrant or something, and you see a sprinkler. And one of these sprinklers, and if you look at this picture of a sprinkler right here that I'm showing, you can tell immediately that this sprinkler must be in rapid motion and must be actively spraying. Why? Because the water arcs are actually curved. That is showing you the past history of the spin. You can actually, if you knew how fast the water was spraying out, you could actually calculate just from this one picture how fast the hose was spinning. And that's because the water and the spin speed are actually like kind of comparable. It's interesting. So if you have this delayed reaction, you can learn something about the object that shot it out. Well, it turns out, if you look at the shadow, I mentioned it was this really nice conical thing, this nice straight line. But if you look carefully, you can actually see that it has ripples in it. And here's the thing. Because of the speed of light, and Matt was talking earlier about the slowest speed, the shortest time that light can take to cross a molecule. Well, it takes light quite a long time to get from the star to the end of the shadow. In fact, it takes light about 45 days. So even though we're seeing this picture sort of, at a distance, we're standing back and we're seeing the whole shadow, the part of the shadow that's being cast near the star is actually 45 days ahead of the part of the shadow that's being cast far away from the star. So that means what you're seeing is this sort of trail, this border that's kind of like the spray of the water from the hose. So if you wave your garden hose back and forth, you could sort of figure out what happened. And that's telling us something very interesting about the timing and the relative positions of the star and the disk. So it's really awesome stuff. And I love that this was like a total accident of the study. And this is the kind of thing you get when you just pour over Hubble data. All of Hubble's images are public and free and downloadable from the MASS portal, which we host, and all that data becomes public, and it continues to be. And actually, about half of the papers, the scientific research papers produced by Hubble, are actually based on data that was already taken, archival data, not new observations. So I love being part of this, and it's just kind of an amazing phenomenon. So what we did was we modeled the exact shape of this shadow clip and did some math. And if you guys want to go through the radiative transfer equations, I can help you, but I think we'll skip that. And we found that the angle changed. And so it was pretty amazing to kind of study this. And I'm really excited about the future, because what we can do is take a look at this shadow and figure out whether it is something that will continue to go over time. Will it continue to bounce up and down? We want to look at it over and over again just to figure out, like, make a little flip movie basically of what's happening, and use that to understand this tiny region of the disk that would be otherwise impossible to study. And these things do exist elsewhere, but they're really rare. So anyway, this is something I'm really excited about, and I kind of just wanted to talk to you guys about it and see what people are thinking. So with that, I think I will stop here and take questions. Matt, should I stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing. And for everyone who's watching, this is a great time to type in some questions in the chat area for Joel. Since I'm hosting, I get to ask the first ones. That's my exciting privilege. So I have innumerable ones. First one I'll start with is, so for the particular example that you showed of the one shadow, how long, and in case you said this, I apologize if I missed it, but how long will that shadow remain observable? Is that going to go, does that go away in an hour? Does that go away in 10,000 years? How long does that shadow last to us observers from the telescope images?
So, that's a really good question, actually. So the shadow the Serpent's shadow, the bat shadow, or whatever you want to call it, it should exist as long as the exact right geometry that we're seeing is there. So I should say, right, the background, the Serpent's cloud is this cloud of gas and dust that's behind the star, and that's sort of that's like the surface that the shadow is being cast on. If you're doing like shadow puppetry, you need like a projector screen or a wall or something to make the puppet on, to make the shadow on. So that material, the cloud will eventually dissipate. So that's in a few million years. So certainly there won't be any shadow after that, because there'll be nothing to shine it on. The disk itself should also last millions of years. So in principle, as long as the star isn't spinning, as long as the whole system isn't turning, then it should be there. But it kind of depends on what the system is doing. But what's really interesting is we know that it's flapping up and down. So we know something is like, we don't know if it's like a periodic variation, like something stable that's just yo-yoing back and forth, or is it like in the process of, because we only have 2 pictures, is it in the process of floating? So we'd like to take more pictures to give you an idea.
Yeah, that's okay. Oh man, that leads me to more questions. All right, so I've got 2 then. So first to add on that, so how can you request to the Hubble operator and be like, hey, we saw this thing, can you take more pictures? Like who gets priority on, well, actually it's sort of the same question, I guess. So who gets priority in terms of choosing which parts of the sky get the pictures taken? How do you request that? And then I guess I'll say second, which is related to that, and I've asked you this before, but if we have a new audience, can you talk a little bit about how you can call dibs on calling, I want to look at this certain part of the sky, and others want to look at another one?
I mean, the best thing about like astronomy and science is that it's really democratized, right? Like everyone has the night sky, right? The night sky is over every country, and so everyone is interested in this stuff. Anyone can propose for time on Hubble. You just have to have a good enough science case. So Hubble is like, time on Hubble is a precious commodity. So we don't, we try to maximize. And so here I can talk also as someone who's involved in like the operations side, not just as someone who uses the telescope. We make it very, we have a high bar for people to use the telescope. And the reason is that we want it to, like, every minute to be squeezing out exciting science results. And when I say we, I don't mean us who operate the telescope. I mean the community of astronomers get together. It used to be in person, now it's virtual. We'll have 200 scientists come to the Institute in once a year and rank all of the something like 2,000 10 to 20 page proposals of scientific questions and observations that were sent to us, and they'll all rank them, and they'll get ordered in the top 10% or so will get through. So while anyone can get time on Hubble, the challenge is, of course, writing a good enough case that you can convince this committee that they should give you time.
All right, well, I'm going to write a case that I can make shadow puppets on Earth, so therefore I'm going to try to find the first observable interstellar shadow puppet and see if I can get some.
Well, if you're excited by this talk, you're basically hearing my case to the Hubble panel now. So,
all right. Last question. Can you share with everyone watching where they can actually find, since they are publicly available, find Hubble images?
Well, so the most fun ones are on HubbleSite.org, right? And so there's like a huge collection of images, and also, by the way, WebbTelescope.org also has some awesome stuff for James Webb. But HubbleSite is this like massive repository of the most beautiful images ever taken by Hubble, and it's actually now 30 years old. So we have an anniversary image for each year, and I got to have some fun being involved in the 30th. So, which is a beautiful image called Cosmic Reef of another high mass star forming region. It's this amazing brain coral looking thing. You wouldn't even believe it's real, but it is. We took it. But yeah, all the images are kept on HubbleSite, and the main archive for anyone who really wants to do a deep dive into the like underlying data behind the images is on a website called MAST, which we host, the Mikulski Archive for Space Telescopes, named after our former Senator Barbara Mikulski.
Of course. All right, everyone, give a big virtual round of applause to Joel. Thank you for coming to us live from Baltimore. We'll have you back at the end to say goodbye. Rachel, go ahead and fire up your mic, fire up your webcam. So, hey. So I think this is just this program tonight, for those of you who are new to Nerd Nite, is kind of a cool representation of, I think, what we're all about. So we just had a very sort of hard science presentation, but that was also beautiful and inspiring and enjoyable, and also had lots of very difficult math in it. And now we're going to get a presentation that is equally substantive and full of goodness, but it's going to be wacky and wild and historical and full of drinking, but yet extremely substantive at the same time. So I think it's a nice way to show the breadth and depth and possible weirdness sometimes of what we're doing here. So wait, hold your glass up. I'm going to try to not spill this onto my white-ish bedspread. Virtual cheers, everyone. Breaking the camera. All right, so for the next 18 to 21 minutes, everyone, enjoy learning about the Franzias, the Gallows, and the horror and crazy stories that led them to their current delicious wine empires. Rachel, go ahead, take it away.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be telling you the tale of the Gallo family. I am actually a certified wine nerd, but I'm also a millennial, so I identify with wine on like a deeply personal level, because, you know, what is wine but a bunch of grapes that have been stepped on, crushed, and then left in the dark until they were old and bitter enough to fuck you up. So the story I'm telling you today is one of my favorite stories about the wine industry, not only because it's got like murder and mystery to it, but also because it's still incredibly relevant to both the United States wine market and the international wine market, as it is about one very, very powerful dynasty, the Gallo family. So you have almost definitely had a Gallo wine, or if you don't drink, you've been in the same room as a Gallo wine. They make up most of the grocery store wine aisle and the gas station wine aisle. And when your friends host parties, remember parties, usually the wines that get brought to those parties are Gallo wines. They're kind of like the everyday chill wines. And they have some non-wine offerings, as you can tell at the bottom. But Gallos, they make up the largest portion of the United States wine market. So this is a little bit of an old chart, but it's from 2011. Outlined in red, you can see Gallo Winery makes up 22.8% of the US wine market. Very exciting and topical right now, actually. At the end of next month, they will be completing a very exciting merger in which they acquire Constellation Brands, allowing them to also have that additional 12.8% of the wine market. Needless to say, they're kind of a big deal, and they're doing pretty well for themselves. And in 2016, Forbes named the Gallos the 25th richest family in the United States, with a net worth of $10.7 billion, which is just an unacceptable amount of money. But it's okay. It's okay, because they earned this money via the American dream. At least that's what their marketing team likes to say. So the official story of J Gallard Winery is that in 1933, just after the repeal of Prohibition, there were two brothers, and they didn't know anything about wine, but they wanted to make wine. And so they went to the Modesto County Public Library and they asked for books about wine. And the librarian was like, dude, Prohibition just ended. Give me a second. I don't know, probably have pamphlets in the basement. So we went down to the basement, and sure enough, there were two pamphlets about wine. And it was from that tiny amount of information that they built an empire, which is a beautiful story, and I'm sure at least part of it is true, but wow, does it leave out a lot of details. The real story is less American fairy tale and more like gritty HBO drama. Set the scene a little bit. Here's a quote from J's nephew, Mike Gallo. Ernest always told us that blood is thicker than water, but what he really believes is wine is thicker than blood, which is also just like the perfect tagline for this HBO series I'm now pitching to you. So who's this story about? All right, it's about E and J, Ernest and Julio Gallo. But mostly it is about the elder of those two brothers, Ernest Gallo, who is this guy. Now the Gallos are like really private people, so there's not a lot of pictures of them, and most of them are exactly like this. So to save you from having to look at the same picture of an old guy 87,000 times in this presentation, I have recast the Gallos as another completely wholesome HBO family. So these are the Gallos. The Gallos consist of Giuseppe Gallo, the father, who moved from Piedmont, Italy, eventually made his way to California with his brother. He married the daughter of his business partner. She was named Susie. Oh, wow, I've totally forgotten her last name. We'll get to her later. And she had 3 sons, Ernest, Julio, and Joe Jr. Now, I realize that I have kind of gender blind cast Ernest, but honestly, no one loves wine as much as Cersei, so it's kind of perfectly fitting. As I mentioned, Ernest is the eldest. He lived with his parents until he was 1 year old, at which point they had his brother, Julio. Babies are a lot of work. 1 baby is a lot of work. 2 babies, too much work. So they sent Ernest off to live with Susie's parents, the Biancos. That is her last name, thank God. So Ernest went off to live with the Biancos until he was about 5 years old, at which point the Biancos got sick, didn't want to deal with him anymore, shipped him back off to his parents, and finally he was reunited with his original family. Now you might think, ah, how touching. They're going to have family bonding time. Everything is going to be wonderful and delightful. And no, Joe Sr. was a bad man. He was a bad man. He was such a bad man that his wife at this point had already tried to file divorce once or twice, which in 1915, kind of a big deal. Despite the fact that Ernest was like 5 years old at this point, 6 years old, and Julio was only a year younger than him. They were working long hours in the field. They would get whipped if they did not work fast enough, and often they would try to challenge each other and like compete, see who could do the most work, which is a very healthy family dynamic. But it was sort of like family trauma allowed the 2 boys to really bond, and they got a lot closer. I mean, they didn't get like Lannister close. They didn't get like that kind of close, but they were very close. They were like best friends, which made it tough when the youngest Gallo was born. Joe Jr. was born when Ernest was about 9 years old. And Joe Jr. had the audacity to, 1, be a baby so he couldn't work on the farm. 2, not get shipped off to live with his grandparents because he was too much work to deal with. 3, he was born into an already doing kind of okay financially family instead of the impoverished mess that Ernest and Julia were born into. And 4, perhaps the greatest sin of all, Ernest and Julia really wanted their father's approval, and they didn't really get a lot of it. And then this baby comes along, and this baby does nothing to earn it, but he gets the greatest honor of all, being named after his father. So not really set up for a healthy familial love between Ernest and Julio and Joe Jr., which we'll come back to later. Regardless, the family's doing pretty okay up until the point where, oh right, our country made that choice. Prohibition happens, not great for a family whose fortune is built on growing wine grapes. So they start financially struggling, but fortunately, Joe Sr. has a brother, Mike, who is basically the Al Capone of California at this point. He's just gotten released from San Quentin, where he was serving time for running a bunco ring. And when he gets out of San Quentin, he's like, hey guys, I have an extra farm. Like, if you want my extra farm, you can have my extra farm, that's fine. But you do have to do a little bit of business for me. And that business was growing wine grapes so they could create bootleg brandy and then sell it to the soda pop shops around town that were clients of Mike's. This did earn the Gallows a fair amount of money. Oh, by the way, Mike, not a private person, so there's some actual pictures of him, including very cool mugshots. This did earn the Gallows a fair amount of money. But Joe Sr. really didn't like the risk associated with illegal dealings. He may not have been ethical, but he did try to be legal in his business sense. So he got out of the bootleg business and got into the more legitimate trade of selling wine grapes to Chicago. Now, what happens to the wine grapes once they're in Chicago? Probably bootleg wine, but that's not Joe Sr.'s concern, right? For the first year of this new business, Joe Sr. goes to Chicago and he does all the business dealings, but it turns out Joe Sr. fucking hates people from Chicago. Like, he doesn't want to deal with them. He doesn't want to do the haggling. He doesn't want to deal with the business side of things. And so the next year, when Ernest offers to take over that role for his father, his dad's like, yeah, great. I'm going to send my 16-year-old kid by himself to Chicago in the height of Al Capone's reign. Seems like a safe idea. It's fine. It's fine. We'll just give him a gun and he'll totally be fine. And it turns out he wasn't entirely wrong. Ernest did really, really well up there. He kind of really took to the business making of these sorts of sales endeavors. He had a quote at one point where he was like, me and my dad really differ in that if somebody angered my dad, he would just stop doing business with him altogether. But for me, every deal is a new deal. I don't care what you did to me 15 minutes ago. If I can make a profit off of you, I'm gonna make a deal. So with Ernest running the sales and Julio and his dad back at home on the farm, they really start raking in the money. This little tiny farm that Mike gave them turns into a large house with like 150 acres. They bought thousands of shares of Transamerica stock. They were doing quite all right. And a couple of years go by, Ernest is doing this. He's also earning his high school degree, which, like, honestly, props to him. He's now 19, and he and his younger brother, Julio, kind of feel like, listen, we helped build this empire. We deserve a raise or, I don't know, shares in the business. At the time, they were making $30 a month, which in like 2020 money is like $450 a month. So still not super great. They went to their dad and they were like, hey, shares in the company or a raise, what do you think? And their dad was like, absolutely not. And so they kept pressing and their dad kept saying no, and they kept pressing and their dad kept saying no until eventually their dad got tired of saying no. So he just chased them through the fields with a shotgun. A+ parenting from Joe Sr. The boys took a couple of months to recover from that, but eventually they did come back and they were like, okay, so that tactic's not working. All right, if my dad doesn't care about me and my financial stability, what does he care about? He cares about business. He cares about business and his relationships with his business partners. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna marry the daughter of my dad's business partner, Amelia Franzia. Yes, those Franzias. And so the Gallo dynasty and the Franzia dynasty combine. Ernest goes to his dad and he's like, hey, I gotta take care of my wife. Be a real shame if I wasn't able to afford taking care of her, given she's the daughter of your business partner. But that still doesn't work for Joe Sr. He sees right through it, wants nothing to do with it, still says no. It's getting a little unfortunate for Ernest and Julio because they're now adults. They really want to take control over their future. They want to take control over the future of the business. Joe Sr.'s health, especially his mental health, is starting to fail a little bit. And Prohibition is about to end. And Ernest genuinely realizes that there is a lot of money to be made in wine once Prohibition ends. So on June 14th, he goes to the Prohibition administration and he files an application to open a bonded wine storeroom. 6 days later, the Prohibition administration comes back saying, no, in order to have a bonded wine storeroom, you need to have a bonded winery. In order to have a bonded winery, you need to have a vineyard. And, oh, right, your dad owns everything and he's never going to give any of it to you. Sorry, dude. And this sucks. This genuinely sucks for Ernest. It would really stand in his way if this continued to be the case. This rejection happened on June 20th. On June 21st, here's a headline from the local newspaper. Oh, no, Joe Sr. and his wife have been found dead in a murder-suicide. There are no other possible motives for what could have happened to the two of them, despite the situation surrounding the murder-suicide being really, really sketchy. We want to get into that in the Q&A. I've got details, but it don't add up. Regardless, it doesn't matter. No matter how they ended up dying, they were out of the way, allowing Ernest to finally take control of the destiny of the family. Sure enough, 2 months later to the day, J Gallard Winery is founded. Now, I'm sure at some point in those 2 months, they went to a library. So that PR version of the stories may be true, but wow, does it leave out a lot of really important details about the founding of this company. Oh. From the beginning, this company doesn't really do things the way that the rest of the wine world has done things. Everyone else after Prohibition, people who've been making wine for a while, they go back to their old ways, grow the grapes, you crush the grapes, you ferment the grapes, and then you sell the grapes, right? But they weren't about to waste years aging and fermenting grapes when there was profit to be made right now, and people weren't picky. They had just been drinking embalming fluid. They just wanted booze. And so they started selling halfway fermented grape juice because, like, who cares? Prohibition just ended. And while the rest of the wine industry is sitting there clutching their pearls in horror at the business practices of the Gallows are like, doesn't matter, got paid. And they start making money. This sort of philosophy really leads like the whole business practice of the Gallows at the beginning. These are some of the early offerings made by the Gallows. Nobody drinks Boone's Farm because, oh, it's such a lovely vintage. No, you drink Boone's Farm because it's cheap, readily available, even if you're underage, and it gets you wasted. Like, that was what people wanted post-Prohibition. Still happens to be what college students want. They made wine for consumers, not for snobs. They didn't make good wine, they made more wine. And this really is exemplified in the story of their earliest success, which is Thunderbird. So the Gallows were really hands-on with their business practices. They had a habit of going into any store that sold their materials, checking things out, seeing how things were going. And in one of these store visits, they noticed that on the counter there was Kool-Aid and there was lemon juice. And they asked the store proprietor, what's up with that? And the proprietor explained, well, people come in here and they buy wine, often Gallo white port, and they don't really like the taste, so it's kind of cloyingly sweet. So what they do is they pour a little bit out and then they pour Kool-Aid in it and they like the way that tastes. And instead of being horrified by the fact that people were pouring Kool-Aid in their wine like any other winemaker would be, Ernest and Julia were like, huh, so that's what the market wants. So they went back to their engineers in their lab and they explained this and they came up with Thunderbird, which has the flavor palette of white port, Prohibition era white port, and Kool-Aid. And you know what? It worked. It skyrocketed them to the top of the market. I mean, part of the reason was the product. You know, again, that idea of selling more wine, not good wine, but also part of the reason was their business practices. They did some interesting things, a little bit of shady shit. So from the 1950s onward, which is roughly when Thunderbird really skyrocketed to the top, they were doing all sorts of interesting things. They weren't selling wine. Gallow wine salesmen didn't sell wine, they sold a service. They would restock wine shelves, and in exchange, they could put Gallow wine wherever they wanted to. If, while they were restocking these shelves, they happened to, I don't know, paint grease all over the competition's wine bottles so they'd collect more dust, making it look like they don't sell as often, open wine caps or, you know, compromise corks so that product goes off, hide product from competitors, all those sorts of things. That's just the cost of doing business. They also had some interesting marketing tactics. They would often go into areas and they would just litter Thunderbird bottles in the gutters. They'd throw them in the back seats of cars to make it look like everyone was drinking Thunderbird. In reality, they were just littering. And they also got into politics. This was admittedly a little later than the 1950s, but they did some really interesting stuff, including probably the most famous, the Gallow Wine Amendment. Not its official name, but what everyone called it. It's really boring, and it basically just means that, like, rich people don't have to pay as much inheritance tax because rich people don't want to give money to not rich people. They also were responsible for making some super chill labeling laws in the US so they could get away with calling stuff champagne that very much wasn't champagne. And they did perhaps my least favorite thing. They gave a lot of money to Bill Clinton so that he would keep us from being able to have Chilean wine in the United States. Like, you get a little bit, you get some Chilean wine up there, but like the whole world of very affordable, very high quality wine that is not getting imported to the United States because it would threaten the Gallows. I'm currently in Costa Rica, so I get to drink it and it's pretty nice. But least favorite thing the Gallows did. Either way, it worked for them. 1940s through the 1950s, Gallo sales increased by 400%. In the 1960s, they were so influential that they basically just had to pick what grapes got grown that season by bullying people with prices. So it used to be all mission grapes in California after the Gallows. Now we've got Cabernet Sauvignon, all sorts of things. Also, to give you just an idea of how powerful they were, in the late 1970s, Coca-Cola tried to get into the wine business with the direct intention of toppling the Gallos. Under 10 years, I think it might be under 5 years, they gave up and sold all of their wine holdings to Seagram's. This is the year after they sold to Seagram's. You can see J Gallard Winery, 25.9% of the market share, Seagram's 9.8%. Second Coca-Cola did not succeed. And it was great for them. They were making a lot of money, but their whole sell more wine, not good wine philosophy was also starting to bite them in the ass. So jump back about 10 years to my favorite event that happened in wine history, the Judgment of Paris. Prior to the Judgment of Paris, American wine was a laughingstock. It was seen as swill. But one day in Paris, there was a fancy blind tasting. A bunch of wine experts got together and they did a blind tasting of both some of the top quality American wines and a bunch of really nice French wines. Everyone in Europe thought it was going to be a landslide. American wines were going to get totally trashed. There were two categories, Chardonnay and red wine. Guess who won both categories? That's right, the US. And so the international market started to take stock. But despite the fact that the Gallos were by far and large the largest company in the United States making wine, they weren't invited to participate in the Judgment of Paris because it was about quality wine, not bulk wine. And so the Gallos realized that if they wanted to break into the international market, they needed to get away from their bulk persona, which would be fine if it was just them using the Gallo name with bulk. But remember our little friend Joe Gallo? He got tired of working with his older brothers, and he went on to work with what he loved, cows. He made bulk cheese under the name Joseph Gallo Farms. The Gallos told him to stop, and Joseph was like, it's my name. I can't stop. I only have one name. And so Ernest and Julio did not take kindly to being told no. They tried to sue their younger brother for use of his own name. Now, Joe Gallo, I know I'm portraying everyone as a Lannister, but Joe Gallo was a little bit of a teddy bear. He really looked up to his older brothers, and he didn't want to fight them on this, but he had no choice. And so he countersued, saying, hey, you remember when our parents died in that murder-suicide and mom hastily wrote a will in her own handwriting, maybe, that said that each of us gets 1/3 of the inheritance when we turn 21. I kind of got shafted on this. You guys are billionaires and I have cheese. So I'd like my third, which was a big deal. This is a quote from Joe Jr.'s lawyer, which says, Ernest was all powerful. He was God in Joe's mind. He would no more think of asking why he didn't have a share of the winery than he would ask me why I can't fly. But he still countersued. Bless him. It didn't work, because the judge who was in charge of the case maybe kind of a little bit got his career because of Gallo Winery money, so he was a little bit biased. But Joe didn't go down without a fight. I mentioned earlier that the Gallos are really private people, so how do I have a 20-minute long talk just about dirt on the Gallos? Most of this information came out during that court proceedings. There have been multiple books that have been written about the Gallos and their shenanigans based off of the information dug up during these court proceedings. So Joe did manage to do a little bit of damage, although he did have to rename his cheese, which was a shame. So where are the Gallos now? Well, I took the screenshot of their website this morning. They're all about family. I mean, so long as that family doesn't get in their way. And it's true. The current CEO of Gallo Farms is Ernest Gallo, grandson of Ernest Gallo, son of Joseph, who's grandson of Joseph, but not to be confused with Joe Jr. You would really think that as rich people, they would have more than 3 names to choose between, but here they are. And a lot of the upper level management at the Gallo Winery is also Gallo. Gino Gallo, I think, is the head of marketing. There's this great quote about wine not being just in her blood, it's in her hair, it's in her clothes, it's, oh God, it's everywhere. I'm sure that's not how she said it. Anyway, that is the story of the Gallos. Any questions?
So why Chilean wine specifically? I feel like there are lots of other delicious wines from all over the various parts of the world. Why single out Chile?
So
Chile.
I think it might be because Chile makes really good wine, but they kind of messed up for a little while. I can't remember exactly what grape they thought it was, but they were harvesting a very particular grape at the wrong time and treating it, I think, like it was Cabernet Sauvignon. And then they had a bunch of wine scientists come down and do genetic testing on all the grapes in Chile. And the wine scientists were like, hey, this grape you think is Cabernet Sauvignon, it's Carmenere. We thought this was extinct. You've got a really cool grape here and you are using it all wrong. So their wine kind of sucked up until the point where they realized what they had. And then they started making good wine, but the price has not really caught up with the fact that they make really good wine now. And so they're incredibly cheap. They could possibly undercut the Gallos for cheapness versus quality. And so the Gallos keep us from having it.
All right. So in terms of getting into some of the gross things, which is Nerd Nite's specialty, do you have any sense of how common the practice is these days of actually stomping grapes with bare feet?
Ooh, it's still done. I mean, the issue with stomping with bare feet is like, you can't get as much done as you could get done with machinery. So it's more of like a niche, fun, touristy practice or like a smaller winery practice. But you can totally go to a winery, and if you want to stick your feet in grapes, have at you.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a very sort of Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer type of thing. Oh, everyone, instead of painting fences, everyone's crushing grapes with their toes. Come join us. I guess that's a good, yeah. And just I don't know if there's really an answer to this, but why? And I still feel it's true to this day. Like, why is wine seems to always be viewed as just being inherently fancier than beer? Like, why is wine still elite despite its track record of having lots of non-fancy versions of it?
Yeah, a lot of it is sort of just the history of wine. There is so much history to wine. Not that there's not to beer. Beer is, I think, older than wine, but in terms of an artisanal drink, wine got that category way before beer did. And a lot of it also has to do with the laws in especially the old world countries. Like, good Lord, when I became a certified wine snob, I had to do a 40-question theory exam for the level that I'm at. And just like 90% of those questions were just incredibly minute details about France and their labeling laws because they are so poncy. But the U.S. wine industry and a lot of the New World wine industry is kind of trying to get rid of that vibe and make wine.
Well, whatever Sideways did to denigrate Merlot, I think Merlot is delicious.
It did. It actually legitimately ruined the industry for a bit.
It really did. It's the Wazowski family go-to variety. All right, and I guess last question. So, what do you think really happened to Ma and Pa Gallo?
Okay, I'm gonna go over this super fast because I know I went over in my time, but there are a bunch of weird facts related to that. Okay,
Ooh,
so Susie was shot in the back of the head, but prior to being shot, she wrote a check for property taxes and she hand-scrawled this somewhat suspicious will. Joe was shot in the temple. He left no note, but the gun is where the weird stuff is. It was the same caliber as the gun that Ernest used to take to Chicago. I don't know if the gun itself was the same, but the bullet holes were from that same caliber. The gun itself was found across the room from Joe, wiped clean of fingerprints, nothing on the trigger, although there was a handprint on the barrel, which was Joe Sr.'s hand. And there's just like weird stuff with the timeline. The day before this all happened, while Ernest was getting rejected by the Prohibition board, Julio was picking up his little brother at his parents' house, and his mom said something really creepy like, "I don't care what happens to me. All I want is for you boys to work together and get along," which is a really weird thing to say the night before you're murdered. So I don't know. It's suspect.
What's interesting that with the hand-scrawled will then too, was that allegedly made in like the hours before this happened?
Yeah.
Or is that something that had been around forever?
I think it was made very recently to the murder.
Right. All right. Well, maybe she was prophetic. All right, last question. The Kool-Aid and wine combination, why is it big in Barcelona and why is that never caught steam in other places?
What was it?
The Kool-Aid wine combination. Or I guess in Spain I've heard of the wine, half Coke.
Half wine, half Coke is big. It's big in Spain. It's also big in China. When they opened up to the West, that became a very popular thing, was Bordeaux and Coke. I think a lot of areas of the world consider it sacrilege and aren't open to experimenting with mixing wine with things, which is a damn shame because Bordeaux and Coke is actually super delicious. So we should all open our eyes.
All right, well, so for everyone watching at home, if any of you are drinking wine and have a tall glass of milk in your refrigerator, try mixing some milk and wine and see if that'll be the next big thing.
Monster.
What could go wrong? All right. So I think that's just about it for everyone. Can you stop sharing your screen for 1 second also? So for everyone watching, just a couple of quick announcements before we wrap up here. Number one, thank you. I hope this has been an entertaining way to spend an hour and 8 minutes of your Friday evening. Number two, if you want to check out obviously any other Nerd Nights, if you go to nerdnite.com, we have the same very Craigslist-y intentional Internet 1.0 website until 2 weeks ago. We have a new website. It's exciting, and it will actually allow you primarily to watch, properly edited and recorded presentations from many Nerd Nights around the world. So, they're all pretty quick. They're all pretty interesting. So go to nerdnite.com or youtube.com/nerdnite. Check out some things. Number three, everyone who has got a webcam on this, Joel, Rachel, even Littlefield folks. Let's say hi to everyone. Wave, take a bow, take a virtual bow for everyone. It's very important. And finally, just so save. There it is. So save our stages. For all of you who have a Nerd Night venue near to you, there are lots of ways to donate. Obviously, again, they've all been hit very hard, as has Nerd Night and many organizations like ourselves who really rely on live face-to-face shows. So there are lots of great groups to donate to. So if you're in the position to donate, please do so. So yeah, everyone, I hope you have taken next Wednesday off to day drink, either happy drinks or sad drinks here in the States. So more power to you. Yeah. So Joel, Rachel, Gabe and Kaylin from Littlefield, everyone watching, thank you. Bye. See you some other time. I did not spill any wine on my white bedspread. We all win tonight. Bye, everyone.